So, um, how are you feeling? Like, how are you reflecting on the chance to be here again today and the space of collab, and getting to see some of these talks and even your own talk again after 2 months? A lot can change in 2 months, huh? Who wants to share some reflections?
I can share one, which is that, in my talk, I talk about the um, the idea or like the tactic, I guess you can say, of leading a learning agenda or a learning plan. And
Yeah.
I was just kind of smiling at it because it's evolved so much. I've actually been working on it these past 2 weeks and have a lot more to say about it. So,
Mm,
yeah, interesting.
lay it on us. What more do you have to say about it?
Oh
Now we're
no,
curious.
just like I think what I kind of presented was less rigorous than the evolution that I've taken it in the last 2 weeks, and it's just really exciting. I think just in terms of like tactically what changed, I think I presented it as like, oh, you have a hypothesis, and then but we've like transformed that into something much more detailed with sub hypotheses and so forth and so on. So I've just I don't know. I smiled at that just because seeing where it was and like how it's evolved has been interesting, and it's something that I'm scaling at Thumbtack right now. So just very excited to see that again.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's back to that's what we do as leaders, right? We listen, we learn, we change, we evolve. That's really cool. I'm sure there may be questions to dive even more deeply into that because I think it's just really such a powerful concept. But opening up the floor to anybody else's reflections.
Yeah, I would say for me, my reflection is that it just kept getting reinforced that we aren't asking the right questions. And so even when I'm going to my team and I'm telling my team, to ask what are those assumptions that are on the table, and that's really the big one. But keep unpacking those assumptions and understanding really like Nicole, not just asking that question, but digging a little deeper and adding a little more rigor to that, and not just what the assumptions are, but what is the pain that we think we're solving for. Because sometimes the business has a perspective on the direction that the company might be going or the problem we might need to solve from a long-term strategic standpoint that may be out of the immediate friction or the immediate pain that the customer is communicating to us. And so how do we marry those two things, and how do we better understand from the business when we present this research, is it going to land because they understand the connectivity between the problem that they think we're solving and the problem that the customer actually has?
Yeah, yeah. And I'd love to hear from all of you at some point too about that a little bit, a couple clicks deeper into that that's so important, that alignment. But we also heard from a lot of speakers today that we want to be more proactive and kind of look around corners. So that's kind
Right.
of a tricky bit, right? Is like aligning people around um, items on the learning agenda that aren't necessarily blatantly being asked for, but as the research team saying like, hey, I think we need to take a look at this and we all need to align on that. That can be where things I know I see in the chat where things can get a little bit messy and fuzzy. I just made up a new word, muzzy. Anyway, any other reflections?
Yeah. So the talk I gave her, the thinking that I was doing at the conference around how do we allow people to digest the insights we're delivering and make sense of them together has
Yeah.
been super present right now because we're like in the middle of road mapping season and thinking a lot about H1. And so in the like on sites and kind of coming together as a group to digest insights and how it's shaping what we're doing in the next half, it's even more important to like not time box too much this like understand sharing, right? Of like, okay, we have this 45-minute meeting to share understand findings and then go from there and take it into the next meeting, which is, prioritization. But instead kind of like revisiting the insights as they can digest and as people
Mm-hmm.
like kind of diverge and converge. So like go off into their like specific teams or their specific function meetings and then come back into like the understand findings and be able to connect the dots over the course of multiple touch points.
Yeah.
Because just like one meeting, with a mural or in a Figma doc just doesn't do it.
Yeah, there's actually some questions in the Q&A, and I know there was some stuff in the chat kind of along those lines too. And you know what, I just your core message is such a powerful reframe. I mean, in such that like once you say it, it's so obvious, but you've never thought about it. And it just makes, at least made me have to sit back and be like, our product is not working. And what do we do when products are not working? We try to understand our users better and we iterate. And so what you just said is so cool because that's exactly what you're doing, right? Is iterating into that and saying like, okay, this is one way of doing that, but we also have to meet people where they are in a more kind of nimble way. That's a great. There are a few more questions we'll tag into here, but Mina, I want to give you a chance to reflect.
Thanks, Julie. I've been thinking about a lot of things since the conference that actually emboldened me to try some new things after being in reflection mode for a while. So I actually have the team, thanks to Eniola's talk, Meg's talk, everyone's talks. I've been taking little bits and pieces and experimenting with my team, and my team's been wonderful about trying new things. We're trying to reduce the length of our readouts. We're trying to change a bit about how we engage with our partners. So, despite having these ideals that I shared myself at the conference around partnership, there's always more to be done and different ways to incorporate other people's perspectives to make your approach better. So that's what I've been up to for the past couple months.
I love it. I love to hear that. I mean, me too. I've been working on applying some of the incredible insights that we heard at our conference with my team. And that's the beautiful thing about what we're trying to do here together, right? All right. Well, actually, specifically, what have you tried, Mina? I'm curious.
I think I just started to touch upon the readout lengths,
Okay.
and then kind of coaching the team around, what are the different types of people that we need to engage and how do we approach them differently, uniquely. So perhaps you've got your working team and you're going to get really down and dirty in the weeds of your insights and your findings and go through every single one. Is that how you engage an executive audience? No, obviously not. But how do we engage with different audiences? So that's what I've been working on.
Yeah. And I know something that Meg couldn't be with us today, but something she talked about raised a little bit of tension in my mind around this of like making your insights kind of repeatable in that like they're in a certain template and a certain format. And so people know what to see, you're creating some like neural pathways in your partner's minds of like, oh, when I get a readout from the team, it kind of looks like this. I know where to look for this kind of data and look for where the dots are connecting and look for charts and things like that. But at the same time, being really creative and iterative in how you present findings and insights with your partners. Curious if any of you have felt that tension or kind of how you balance that like repeatability and predictability with creativity.
I'll say that sometimes as I'm, especially over the course of halves, when learnings are like continuing to come up or continuing to be relevant in work, I feel like a little bit of a broken record. And I'm like, I'm thinking through like, oh, the team's heard this, like they don't need me to come in and say the same thing. And, like they know this. And it brings me back to like lessons that I've learned in like marketing of like, no, people need to see a thing. Like, I don't know, I forget what the stat is, but it's like 11 times or like 20 something times or something for it to like click, right? Because you're not just saying, here's something that's relevant for their work. I'm saying it in a way that's relevant to like meet their mind or click for them right now. And also at a point where they're like focus, like I'm trying to catch their focus, right? So it's like, I've had to like reframe okay, you sound like a broken record or they don't need to hear this again to like, no, keep bringing it up. And every time you say it out loud, it'll hit in a different way and might like strike up a different conversation or application to our work stream.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead. Somebody was going to chime in? No?
Oh, I think that was me.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say, I'm a huge music fan. And so I used to also refer to our department jokingly as the Department of Broken Records. And then I realized that was somewhat uncharitable and unfair and very unhelpful. So I started thinking of it as even songs that I know really, really well, and I know the melodies and I know the beats of them and I know the mood of them. I sometimes don't remember the lyrics, or when I listen to them for the umpteenth time, I'm like, I'm thinking of that differently now because of the context that I'm in when I listen to this song, different from what I did before. And I think that's kind of maybe a more productive way to think about playing the same record over and over again. That's not necessarily a broken thing. That might be more of a like, I'm just getting into it in a different way kind of a thing.
Mm.
I'll build
That-
on that by sharing a bit of personal experience. I'm moonlighting in a cover band, which is the first time that I've played covers. So you're learning other people's songs. You're learning the
Girl.
songs of the greats. That's not there for show. That's actually being used every week.
Yes.
So what I've learned is that you have these brilliant classic songs that you're trying to learn as someone who's brand new to the song, and you're trying to learn it in 2-3 weeks. It's really an aggressive timeline. And you're never going to sound like Freddie Mercury, or you're not going to sound like that brilliant drummer in Rush. But what do you do to make that a little different or yours? And possibly from show to show, how do you want to change that performance? Kind of reminds me of what you're talking about too. Like, I think you can adjust that message and make it yours a little differently each time. We have that liberty to try new things.
Yeah, we want to be that band that the crowd comes back to see over and over and over and over again, even if they are playing the same old songs every single time.
Absolutely.
Dr. Nikki, I wonder if you have any perspective on the importance of asking questions from the outset. I mean, I know you do, that's what your whole topic was about, but if you've been sitting here thinking about how that plays into maybe not being, coming up with a new hit, let's say, rather than playing the old classic to exhaust our metaphor.
Because asking those questions, you can converge that into your research. And so when you put the questions, and kind of like how I talked about it in the talk, when you put the questions on the table, it's not just so that, okay, I know what that question is and I'll make sure, we think about it, but it's how do you converge that into what you had into your learning agenda, like Nicole said, into what you need to go find out in your research. And so that you can give the perspective not only of the story of what your research was going to say, but also those assumptions and converging that into, hey, we answered it and we gave it a new spin and we gave it context within the research, right? Or you give your research context within the business. And so having those two things converge together can really give either one of them a new spin.
Yeah, and I think your talk and several of the others really touched on a really important reframe, is that we can and should and benefit from applying our methods internally to our organizations to contextualize our findings as much as external users of our products and services. And I think something that I've thought about over the years is, and encountered sometimes quite painfully, is that I don't always have permission to do that, right? I know it's important, I can see it's important, and I want to share that with the organization, but they're just expecting me to tell them what users think about this concept or what users' needs are around there or something like that. So I wonder if any of you can speak to like how you would advise people to get that permission to maybe look into corners of the organization along with the users.
So part of what you're speaking of, Julie, that question made me think about what you guys sent out as the second question and how you might really start to transform or prepare yourself for these shifts. And part of it is connecting your domain understanding, your domain knowledge of research with the business. And so an example of that, I would say, sometimes I'm in rooms and I'm trying to fight for us to do discovery research. And I say, we can't do this. We can't come out with a solution if we don't have customer needs statements. We have to be able to anchor ourselves to customer needs statements and have that defensibility. When I was leading with my domain knowledge, I was leading with methodology, I was leading with research, when what I could have said was, we have some open questions in our European market, and we can't really justify pulling out a global solution without answering those open questions. And so we must do discovery research because of that. And so I'm like connecting the business with, oh my gosh, Nikki, we do need to make sure this solution is viable for European markets, and not necessarily connecting it or anchoring myself on, we must have need statements, right? And so
Yeah.
the understanding transitions from I'm fighting for the research rather than I'm really fighting for the business and us making the right solutions and the choices. So
Yeah. The other thing you've done there, which is really artful, is invited other people's curiosity about the same curiosities that you have.
mhm.
That's really powerful. I want to lean into that theme that you just brought up, Dr. Nikki, about transformation and how we need to grow and what we need to. I love the themes that have come up in the talks too, of like what do we need to check at the door and what do we need to pick up and run with. But before we do that, there's a couple really specific questions in the Q&A that I want to dig into. One of them is from Anna, who, thank you for being so lively in the chat, Anna, loved it. Anna asks, I would love to hear about how to immerse new team members into past research beyond just pointing them to the research repository.
I can take this one. I'm actually revamping our onboarding process as we speak, so this is very top of mind for me. I think there's so many ways to immerse people in the research that's already been done. Certainly, there's the research repository, but I don't know. Me personally, I have a really hard time like reading volumes of information and actually feeling anything from it. I'm more of a person that processes things by hearing. And so one thing I always encourage new researchers to do is to set up time with each of the researchers, have them take that person through like what they deem the most pivotal insights or the most critical insights of their area, kind of explain the dynamics. By like meeting face to face, you get a lot more context than you would from just like a very 2D research report. That's one. I think depending on the seniority of the researcher, if it's possible, like one thing that I will encourage actually at any seniority level, if there's research going on that they're able to attend and kind of shadow and kind of just be like a fly on the wall, that's another way to kind of start immersing them in like current research, as well as just like some of the process as well. And then of course, like on my team, we do some videos of recapping, the most important insights, or like we'll do reels of, different clips from various interviews around a certain theme. So that's another way that we kind of, onboard new researchers.
Yeah, I mean, video is obviously really powerful. The designers on my team here at Dscout do a lot of Loom videos, kind of walking through different designs. And, it's something I'm really wanting to encourage the researchers to do as well. Like just do a Loom video of your findings. And those are things that are so easy to watch. You could stick them right in Slack and all of a sudden you're like you're in the flow of business. Any other thoughts on that one?
I think when somebody is, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just gonna say, I really like what you said, Nicole, about like shaping the way that you're having folks on board by like how they process information. So like you said, your auditory, like I'm very, very visual and kinesthetic. So like when I'm learning something and we're talking through findings or like recapping, it doesn't really sink in for me unless I can see what's happening. And also like, can I test it out myself? So like the platforms that I work on, like I don't know what we call it externally, but I dog food them, or I like go through the process. I practice the process as if I was the user, right? So like going in and auditing it, and then it clicks like, oh, okay, this is the journey that they're going through. I walk through the journey myself. So I like that of like shaping it based on how that person prefers to process information.
Yeah, I love that. Another idea that just occurred to me is connecting your researchers with people who spend the most time with your users, which in some case might be the sales team, depending on your company, or the customer support team. Those people know so much about what's going on with the users that spending a couple days with those teams can really shed a lot of light too.
I like that.
I was going to say something along the lines of what Eniola just shared, which is that, based on the person's learning preferences and consumption preferences, you might not want to drop the equivalent of a pile of books on their desk to say, here, onboard. I also think that onboarding through the course of your own job, your own role, is the best way. So I've found that some of the most experienced researchers who have joined the team show up and their first ask is, how soon can I get in front of people myself to kind of absorb this information firsthand? And perhaps in the process of some work they're about to do, I'll ask them to go talk to these 3 people about some foundational pieces of research that were done in the past. So trying to kind of craft that path based on current work, what's important to them, seems to be more effective than just saying, here are 20 studies to read.
Yeah. And here's a little bit of an orthogonal perspective on it, which is, don't tell them anything. Let them discover for themselves, and their fresh eyes will probably bring you maybe even new ways of looking at your users that you're kind of habituated to. All right, great question. Here's another one. This is from Sarah, a very real question. How would a sole UXR on an internally focused team, a health systems IT department, build out a learning agenda if they're not included in many higher leadership meetings and aren't privy to the bigger KPIs? I want to be able to initiate research at my org, but I'm newer, so I've been taking projects assigned. How do you get more proactive, really? Yeah.
Well, I'd start by asking that. I'd start by trying to understand, I'm sorry, I missed the person's name. It was
Sarah.
Sarah. I'd start by asking Sarah how she builds her roadmap today. I don't know if we want to make this interactive, but I think in general, what I would say is that I think the idea of a learning agenda is almost like a research roadmap, but agnostic of signal, right? And so I think that like collectively you need to decide as a team. It's not just a solo activity. You decide as a team what you're trying to learn over the course of a quarter or a half, that will enable you to, figure out like, are you on the right direction in terms of like, your end destination? And so the first thing I'd clarify is that it's not, an activity that just research is doing on its own. It's really, the talk that I gave was more of an opportunity to be a leader on the team, and help your team understand and kind of center itself on what the team needs to learn. And then it's sort of like, well, if we need to learn, X, Y, and Z, here are the disciplines best suited to answer that and to give us signal. So, all of who answers the signal depends on a, multitude of factors like timelines, like fidelity, and confidence in the signal that you're getting. There's a lot of things to weigh. Obviously, if you build something and ship it, that's probably the best signal you can get or the highest confidence signal you can get, but that's expensive. It takes a long time. So there's cheaper ways to learn. And that's what the learning agenda is really all about, is helping your team interrogate, like, what do we need to learn this quarter in order to understand if like the direction we're going in is the right one to go in.
It reminds me of like earlier on in my career, I thought like when I was in product meetings or stand-ups or like data meetings, I was like, I just thought UXR just had its lane and I need to stay in my UXR lane. So if it wasn't a CAPD meeting, or if they weren't asking for insights, I was like, why am I in this meeting? Like, I'm on mute, I'm just listening to what's going on. It's a lot of product jargon. And those are the meetings that we need to be like, especially like proactive in, and like, as researchers, like it's so important for us to know our product like the back of our hands, and that includes the metrics, that includes like where we're at with experimentation, like what we're doing on the end side, like understand it holistically, because our job is a tall ask, like to foresee like what we're going to need in order to continue to build where we're going and what we're going to need to unblock to know that. And so we have to know our products really, really well. And I think not just talking to leadership and interacting with leadership, but interacting like all the way across our cross-functional roles, to know all the angles and all the like the inside and the out of our product to be able to like predict okay, based on what we're trying to do and the gaps that exist now, here's what we should do moving forward, and being able to predict those things. And even as you're, you may be bogged down with like assigned projects that are like, here, we need you to do this. Even like looking at it from a different direction or getting creative with that of like, oh, well, let's tack on this, or maybe this connects to this piece that we haven't talked about just yet, and starting to build the trust with the team to be able to get into the driver's seat.
I love that. Dr. Nikki, Mina, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I was just enjoying that one.
I know, so good, so good. All kinds of gems dropping here. I guess I would add that only that I have a lot of empathy and memories coming back to me of when I had been in similar positions as you, Sarah, and maybe a little bit of advice is to you may not be able to conquer the whole organization right away with a learning agenda, right? This can take some time, but nothing stops you from doing it now for yourself. And nothing stops you from learning about the business. Annual reports are available. Like there's a lot you can draw on from the talks that came out today that you can start to put those building blocks into place. And once you have established that learning agenda, start to plug in these projects that you are getting assigned to you or kind of reactive projects, and then reflecting it back to your leadership and different people in the organization to say, like, here's how I see what I'm doing fitting into some of the other broader questions we have that tie to the business. And it's okay for you at first to kind of keep that a little close to the vest and practice that. Maybe you've met some people here today, or been exposed to us who would be willing to kind of take a look at it, give you some advice, things like that. So don't feel like you have to get, from 0 to 100 in a quarter. Give yourself a little bit of grace, as Malia said. All right, another question popping in here. Any suggestions on how we as researchers can evaluate the visibility and feasibility of our recommendations to ensure that they are both practical and aligned with business goals? Viability and feasible of recommendations. That's kind of fun.
Yeah, that sounds like the DVF framework.
I know, which also is Diane von Furstenberg, but that's just
I
where
always
my
think
mind
that
goes.
too. I'm glad you brought that up. I can take, or I can contribute to this one. When I was an IC researcher, a lot of times when I was developing my recommendations and reports, it wasn't, again, I go back to this like solo activity thing. I think it's really important to involve your stakeholders throughout the process, even when you're in the process of creating, your deliverable and making those recommendations, because I think it's helpful to connect your recommendations, it's for it to be grounded in a perspective other than your own. So if you don't know a lot about feasibility, for example, I used to like check in with the eng director or what have you and say, hey, like I'm about to recommend this. Like, what do you think? Is that feasible? How long would it take? What are some of the trade-offs? And being able to get that information really helped make the recommendation very specific and actionable, because it was sort of like, here's my recommendation. And if we want to take it, here are the things that we need to consider. And here's what we need to do next.
Yeah.
So even when you're writing your recommendations, I'd encourage you to think about it as not a solo activity.
Yeah.
Along those lines, like you definitely should get to know your dev partners as much as possible. I think that bringing the insights to them and having that conversation around what would you do in response to this, and trying to work that through before you get to anything you're going to share more broadly, will really keep things smooth sailing.
Yeah, I was just going to say, anything you can do to avoid surprises is good, right? And kind of to Eniola's point too earlier about that feeling of overwhelm of like, all these technical conversations, I can't know these things. You can know those things. You can know those things. And John Garvey's kind of provocation to us that like oftentimes research and increasingly design are asked to kind of create self-serve ways of doing some of the work that we do. You feel free to ask your partners and stakeholders to do the same. I'd like to learn a little bit more about what you do. I'd like to learn a little bit more about developing products. What goes on in engineering? Tell me more about the business realities and how the business function and the economics that drive our business. Like, you can ask for that too. And I think that's kind of back to this empowered generalist idea that John was sharing earlier today too. All right, I want to lean a little bit back into where we departed from with our Q&As, although keep them coming, because as you can see, we're addressing them as they come in. A big theme from all the talks today really is about kind of the idea of molting, kind of shedding our skin, really transforming into seeing ourselves in ways that we didn't see ourselves a year ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago, my gosh. This can show up as like driving impact, business acumen, reinventing that seat at the table, like Mina's talk, or to really reimagining what we think we're capable of. But for the people on the call today, UXers out there who aren't in leadership roles like we are, what is some specific advice you would give them to kind of prepare for some of the transformations that are coming? Who wants to kick us off?
I'd be happy to. I've been thinking a lot about learning as a result of both the conference and some other reading that I've been doing around the learning process and the fact that ADP does research learning as a topic. So people on my team are regularly engaging on the topic with a myriad of different types of people out there. So the things that I've kind of been reflecting on over the past couple months have to do with how learning takes hold in your work, in your life, in your mind. And I think a key part of it that I was missing and not articulating was the sharing back of the information. So every speaker at CoLab went on a learning journey to put their talks together, whether they prepared them for other conferences prior or just for this conference. In my case, we did our research, we processed all our thinking, took all our learnings across our careers and put them into a package to share with everybody else with the intention of communicating and multiplying that knowledge and offering something that somebody else can take and act on in their own way. So to this end, I think learning is that kind of journey. It doesn't end when you've just been exposed to the information. It ends after you've attempted to share that knowledge with somebody else. And as researchers, I think we all share that trait of loving to do that, like package the data, share it with somebody else. And so looking at it from a career point of view, like how can you take the high level learnings around your professional growth, your skills, and think through it well enough that you can articulate it in some way and share it. Who can you share it with that can also help? So it's a little like feel good style thing. And by the way, when you mentioned the word molting, my mind went to a really odd thing that I swear I'm gonna tie back to this topic. I used to have a pet bird, so I'm a crazy bird lady. And this parrot, I watched him go through molting seasons. And the interesting thing about molting, and I was just discussing this with a friend at work, is that their feathers are wrapped up until like another bird comes and helps them nibble the sheath off of the feather so that it can unravel. So it actually, like that bird alone can do some of that work, but it always helps to have someone else there. And so I'm tying that back to learning, because I think that even though it's a little creepy to think of learning as molting, it does help to have someone else there to help you. Your managers, your peers, your trusted allies should be talking to them about your learning journey and not just going and asking for help, because maybe that's not where you are, but sharing what you learned, talking about it, maybe inspiring them to share what they've learned recently. It just seems like a social thing.
I love it. And now I will forever think of it as nibbling each other's feathers in a helpful way. In a helpful way.
Thanks so much for that, Julie.
Well, thank you. All right. Who wants to pick up the baton from that one?
I can build
maybe,
on. Oh,
great.
sorry. Unless you want. Okay, I'll try to make mine quick, but I'll build on the stuff that Mina has been saying. I think when I look back at the moments in my career and in time where I felt like I transformed the most, it wasn't, and maybe this is like a way to look at it. I think I kind of like mark those instances of transformation less by title or role. and it's more around confidence. And so when I think about like the times that I truly transformed, it was like the one metric I would say I would attach it to was like sort of like the confidence boost, or like the more confident, or sort of like the up leveling of my confidence throughout. And so I think I really liked what Mina said about, you know, kind of absorbing a lot of, you know, information and education and all of that. I would take it one step further and encourage people in their process of getting ready for transformation to punch above their weight in some ways. I guess what I
Yes.
mean is like dabble in, like, if you know that like owning a room means X, Y, and Z, like even if you don't feel comfortable, commit to like trying out one of those behaviors. So that's, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. But that's
Yes. Transformation comes with getting out of our comfort zone. Indeed. Yeah. Dr. Nikki or Eniola, did you have anything to share on transformation?
Yeah, I've been trying to get off mute here for a couple seconds, so
Oh, sorry.
no worries. Yeah, so for me, it's interesting because my team actually went through a transformation, as I kind of talked about at the beginning of my talk. We don't do usability tests on my team. We don't. We're more upstream now from traditional UX, and that shift really came about 2 years ago. And so when we thought about getting ready for the transformation, we thought about where are there gaps in our research discipline. And we noticed from a UX standpoint, things were coming downstream, and we had really no way of understanding where this thing, this concept, this prototype, this artifact that we're looking at and testing from a usability standpoint, where the initial pain came from, where the initial idea came from, or how this concept came to be. And no one could really tell us. And so we understood that there was a gap in someone looking at the end-to-end journey. We were solving things in these very distinct silos and disconnected instances from a feature standpoint, or just a small experience standpoint, but really not the entirety of the customer journey, and how pain in the beginning of creating a reservation for your vehicle can cause pain later on in the journey when you go to pick it up, and understanding the connectivity of that. And so when you get ready for the transformation, look for those gaps, look for the questions that aren't being answered, and the opportunities where you can expand and think about your research discipline, not only from a one instance, one siloed experiential standpoint, but also the end-to-end journey and how you can create connectivity between experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Cast that wide net. All right. Pausing in case anybody has anything else to add. We did have another question come up in the Q&A, which is exciting. We ready? Oh, we only have a few minutes left, but here it is. Oh, here's my other cat, just in time. For teams that are closer to implementation or delivery, often focused on tactical research like narrow discoveries, usability testing, how would you suggest working in strategic, forward-thinking discovery goals to inform the future? That's from Ron. Baby steps.
So I think I heard the question right. And so for teams that are working closer to like the more tactical research and like implementing things,
Real close to delivery, yeah.
how do you step back and be strategic? And the first thing that comes to mind is like record the patterns and the things that you're finding in tactical research that are happening over and over again, and like pull out those patterns and start to make them into like pillars, right? So that you can send it over to the people who are further back in the product life cycle, and saying these are the things we continue to learn. And that is just taking what you do best, what comes out of your world, and like shortening that process and improving the product in that way strategically.
Yeah. I mean, I would say in my career, I have found that sometimes the tactical close to delivery work is actually super strategic. We tend to think that that work doesn't have strategic impact on the company, or can't, and it really, really can. To Eniola's point, it's kind of how you frame it, how you look at it, how you connect it with other dots, how you connect it with social science and cognitive and behavioral science to explain the effects that you're seeing, can have a really transformative effect. Any other thoughts on Ron's excellent question before we have to start to sadly and unbelievably wrap things up?
I find that even if you feel like your scope is narrower and or you're looking at more of narrow discoveries, evaluative research, you will always pick up those nuggets, like has been mentioned. You will always pick up those little pieces. So what you do with those pieces based on some of the talks you heard today, that could be a lever. Like you could take a quote from a person using, you know, some of your products and try and put that front and center when it's the right time. You're definitely picking up a lot of data. So you have a lot to work with. It's just a matter of like how you choose to see that information. And again, like discuss with other people and see what comes out of that.
Yeah. And kind of like I said before too, it's kind of a long game. So be prepared for that. Dr. Nikki, Nicole, Eniola, Mina, thank you for taking times out of your incredibly busy days to spend a little bit more time with us in this collab space. Such a delight for me personally to get to spend a little bit more time with each of you. And as usual, super enlightened and inspired by the conversation. So thank you so much. And we'll see you next year at Collab, I hope.